Hello Internet, my name is Scott and this is part one of a two-part video series showing you how to obtain, install, configure, and use VMware's VMware Player desktop virtualization software. VMware Player is probably the most popular and certainly the most popular free desktop virtualization software available, and it's really something cool that VMware gives it away for free for personal and academic use. So this first part, we're just going to grab the software from their website, we're going to install it, and create a new blank virtual machine. And then in part two, we're going to use an ISO, a virtual install file for an operating system to fire up a VM and see kind of what Player lets us do with VMs. So without further ado, let's grab the software. I am already on VMware's website here, vmware.com, and I'm going to jump over to the download software section here. I'm going to scroll down to the desktop and end user computing section here, and VMware Player is the last item on the list, so I'm just going to click download product and it will bring us to the VMware Player product page. This is version 6, mine are version 03. It's the latest. It's been out for maybe 6 has been out for maybe a year, give or take, and it's the one you want to use. They do offer VMware Player for Windows as well as 32 and 64-bit Linux. I've used this software on Windows and Linux, and it works basically just as well in both on both platforms, and it's functionally and visually pretty much identical. So, and to top it all off, it's really easy to move your virtual machines from Player running on a Windows computer to Player running on a Linux computer. And that portability is really a nifty feature, and it's one of the great benefits of virtualization in general. So we are not going to use the Linux version because we're running Windows 7. So I'm going to go ahead and download the version for Windows. And actually, I've already done this, so I'm going to save us about 30 seconds here and hop over to my desktop and start the installer from here. So once you have it downloaded, just start the installer. You guys probably can't see this, but that little ding was UAC asking me if I really do want to install this software. I'm going to say yes, and the installer fires up. The installation wizard is really simple, really straightforward. It only takes a couple of minutes. I'll walk through the steps just to kind of show you what you probably want to choose. As always, you need to understand, or barring that, at least agree to the software license. It's pretty standard stuff. I haven't read through this, but the only thing you might want to know is that VMware Player is free for kind of personal and academic use, but it's not free for business use. So if you do want to use this in a business setting, you would have to buy a license, and you can do that from their website. We're using it for personal use, so we're just going to accept the agreement and move on. If we wanted to, if we had a reason, we could change where the software is going to be installed. The defaults are fine for our situation here. I am going to check for product updates on startup, but I am not going to help improve VMware Player. I know that's selfish, but I'm just not down with sending anonymous data. Sorry, VMware. I'll keep the desktop and start menu shortcut settings the same. I want both. And that's it. I hit continue, and the installer starts, and away we go. This takes maybe 2 to 3 minutes on a reasonably fast PC. I'm going to pause the video because we've all seen enough progress bars in our lives, and there's no reason to watch this, so I will pause it for now. Alright, and the installer has finished. There was literally nothing else I had to do. It's just that easy. So I'm going to click Finish and fire the program up here from my desktop shortcut. And as you'll see, it's a really simple program. Very few options, at least at this point. With Player, there are only so many things you can do with a VM. You can create a new one, you can open an existing one that you made on this machine, or maybe your friend made a VM or your teacher. Um, and we won't go through that. It's just as easy, basically, as opening any file in any application. You just browse, find the VM, and away you go. They do give us the option, thank you VMware, to upgrade to VMware Workstation, which is VMware's commercial, not free for any use, desktop virtualization software. I forget how much it costs. I'm sure it's a couple $100 per license. It's great software. I use it myself. It does have a lot more features than Player, but they're features that most people aren't going to really need to use, at least not when they are just starting out in virtualization. Just a couple of highlights. It does let you tweak your virtual networking settings quite a bit more than Player does. It also lets you take and use VM snapshots, which are sort of like restore points, and there are valid reasons to do that. For our purposes here, we're going to stick with Player because it's free, and it really does everything we need to do for just kind of getting into virtualization. So we're going to move on from there. VMware does have a really good, extensive online help system, lots of good knowledge base articles. So if you do want to get some more information or learn more about Player or VMware's other products, you can follow the help link here. That's pretty much all you need to know about the interface. We're going to jump right in and start creating ourselves a new virtual machine. So we'll click the link here. The new virtual machine wizard is a pretty simple one, just like the installer was. They start out by asking you how you plan to install your operating system. And you have three choices. You can locate an installer disk that's in the optical drive on your host PC. You can use an ISO file, which is just a virtual CD or DVD image, and that's what we're going to do in part 2 when we install Windows in a VM. For now, we're going to move on to the third option here, which is just basically promising that we'll install something later. And for now, the VM will be kind of a blank slate, but that's okay. We'll take that. Now they want you to choose what type of guest operating system you're going to use. We are going to use Microsoft Windows 7, so we can leave the defaults here, but they do support a huge range of Windows, Linux, and other operating systems. So rest assured you can run just about anything that's currently developed and supported on Player. But we'll take the default and move on. They want you to name the VM. This is the only VM I have on this computer, so I'm just going to leave the default. Windows 7 is fine. They also give you the choice to choose where to store the VM. This may seem like a trivial option here, but it actually is really important from a performance standpoint. When you're running a VM, or maybe even more than one VM at the same time, on a single hard drive, it can really bring down the performance of your system. My laptop here has a good old-fashioned magnetic spinning hard drive, and that's the worst kind for VMs, unfortunately, because if you have more than one thing going on a magnetic drive like that, it can really start to diminish performance on your computer as a whole and in the VM. So if I did have a second hard drive here, if I was running maybe a desktop computer or a higher-end laptop, I could choose Browse and locate my other drive and choose to store my VMs on there. But since this is the only drive I have in this computer, I'm just going to leave it on C. At this stage, you can make some choices about your virtual hard drive. Virtual hard drives are really cool. They use something called thin provisioning, which basically says you can set a maximum disk size, but it's not going to use that much, at least not initially. It's going to use 0, or almost 0, megabytes right away. And then once you install an operating system and add more files and software to your VM, it's going to grow the virtual disk dynamically and automatically as you need the space, but it does help you save space on your host system by not gobbling that all up right away. So I'm actually going to choose 25 gigs because that's probably plenty to do an install. And then they also let you decide whether you want to store your virtual disk as a single file or in multiple files. There are trade-offs both ways, as it explains there. When you store it as a single file, you do get slightly better performance, but it's harder to move that VM around, especially if you have like a really big, maybe a 50 or even 100 gig virtual disk. Imagine trying to find and pay for a 100 gigabyte flash drive. I don't even know if those are on the market yet, and if they are, they're probably plenty expensive. So I'm going to leave mine in a single file here just because I don't plan on moving this VM. If I did, I could split it up into multiple files, and it would be easier to move around, but one file suits my needs just fine. This last screen just kind of breaks down the choices that you've made and shows you some of the default virtual hardware that comes with your VM. And we're going to tweak this more in just a second. For now, we'll hit finish, and the VM does show up right there. It's the only one, and there's really not a lot of options at this point. I can turn it on, which wouldn't do much good because there's nothing there, or I can edit the virtual machine settings, which we'll do right now. Virtual machines, as you might expect, have a lot of the same hardware, a lot of the same virtual devices as you would find on a real PC or a real server or a real computer of any kind. You have memory, and you have your virtual processors, your virtual hard disk, your virtual optical drive, virtual networking, virtual USB controller for peripherals, virtual sound card, and so forth. You can really tweak and add and remove a lot here to customize your VM. Just as an example, I'm going to increase my virtual RAM from 1 gigabyte to 2048, and this should actually help increase the performance on my VM anyway. So if I click elsewhere here, you'll see my installed memory goes up to 2 gigabytes, which is great. You can choose to increase or decrease the number of virtual processors you have. So if your computer has multiple cores, like more than 3 or 4, you might as well choose more than one here. It'll make your VM run faster. This laptop only has 2 physical cores total, so I'm not going to increase it. I'm going to leave it at just 1 virtual core, and that should be fine for Windows 7. The virtualization engine settings here let you add some sort of specialized CPU settings. So if you want to research your own processor and find out if any of these are supported, you can do that, and you may reap some benefits, but we're just going to leave that at the defaults. Here's the hard disk we created. We're not going to worry about the virtual CD-ROM drive for now. We will take a quick look at the virtual network settings. The options in here are either connect or disconnect. That's pretty straightforward, just like a real network card. You also get the choice for how you want to configure your virtual networking. How do you want your virtual machine to have its IP address assigned? So you can do bridged networking, which basically gives your VM an IP address on the same network as your host computer. So if my host computer had an IP address of 192.168.1.1, my VM here with a bridge connection might end up with a 192.168.1.2 or .1.3 or something else on the same subnet. And that can be really handy if you want to access this VM from other computers on your LAN. NAT is network address translation, and basically the hypervisor, which is VMware Player, allows you to share your host computer's virtual network and IP address. And that's kind of typically what you'll do. It protects the VM a little more, and it minimizes the amount of configuration that you have to do to get your computer on the network. You can also do something called host-only networking, which it allows you to create a totally enclosed virtual network, just on your host computer. And there are reasons that you might choose to do that someday, but we don't really want to concern ourselves with those, so we're going to stick with NAT. And that's kind of all you need to know about virtual machine hardware for right now. In part 2, we're going to load up an ISO into our VM and turn it on and run through the operating system install. But that concludes part 1, and we will return shortly with part 2 and really get into the meat of it here. So